The air in the atrium of the Museum of Metropolitan Art was thick with the scent of money and ambition, a heady perfume of power that Alexander Price inhaled like oxygen. Light from the vaulted glass ceiling refracted through 1,000 champagne flutes, scattering diamonds across the polished marble floor. He stood at the epicenter of it all, a king in his court, his hand resting possessively on the small of a woman's back. She was not his wife. Her name was Selina Hart, and she was a masterpiece of modern engineering, all sharp, symmetrical beauty and lethal confidence. Her laughter, a tinkling sound as crisp as the vintage Dom Perignon they served, drew the eyes of every man in the room. Her crimson dress, a sliver of silk that clung to her like a second skin, was a declaration. Alexander had bought it for her, just as he had bought her loyalty, her time, and the incandescent smile she now turned upon him. To new beginnings, a voice slurred beside him. It was Marcus Thorne, a tech billionaire whose company Alexander's firm had recently acquired in a move the financial press had called both hostile and brilliant. Alexander raised his glass, the crystal cool against his fingertips. To new beginnings, he echoed, his voice a low, resonant hum that carried the weight of command. His gaze swept the room, a silent inventory of his domain. He saw the flash of camera bulbs from the press pit, the deferential nods from his board members, the envious glances from his rivals. This was his world, a universe he had forged through sheer force of will. And tonight, he was reshaping it. Selina leaned into him, her lips brushing his ear. "They're all watching you," she whispered, her breath warm. "They're all watching us." He gave her a slight, knowing smile. That was the point. The gossip columns had been buzzing for weeks, fueled by strategic leaks and carefully staged paparazzi shots. Alexander Price, the titan of industry, seen dining with a mysterious brunette. Price's 10-year marriage on the rocks. Tonight was not a confirmation, it was a coronation. Selina was not just his mistress. She was his future, a trophy reflecting the man he had become. Sleek, modern, and unencumbered by the past. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Victoria. He pictured her in their cavernous penthouse overlooking the park, a ghost in a gilded cage. Victoria, with her quiet grace, her intelligent eyes, and her infuriating, unwavering belief in the man he used to be. She was the architect of his past, the co-author of his origin story. But history, he reminded himself, was meant to be archived. He remembered the early days, the cramped apartment that smelled of stale coffee and boundless optimism, the nights spent hunched over spreadsheets, Victoria's calm voice, a steadying presence as he teetered on the brink of ruin. She had been his strategist, his confidant, his partner in every sense of the word. Her mind, as sharp as any lawyer's he'd ever hired, had navigated them through treacherous market waters. She had sacrificed her own ambitions, pouring her brilliance into the foundation of his empire. But empires evolved. The man who had needed a partner now needed an accessory. The man who had valued substance now craved spectacle. Victoria was a classic, a vintage piece. Selina was the latest model, all flash and fire. A photographer from Vanity Fair broke from the pack, his lens aimed at them like a rifle. "Mr. Price, a smile for the camera. You and Ms. Hart look incredible tonight." Alexander's arm tightened around Selina, pulling her closer. He turned, presenting their best angles to the world, a curated image of triumph. The flashbulb popped, momentarily bleaching the scene white. In that split second of blinding light, he felt a pang of something. Not guilt, but a faint, irritating echo of a loyalty he had long since rendered obsolete. It was the price of progress, he told himself, the collateral damage of a life lived in the fast lane. "You seem 1,000,000 miles away," Selina murmured, her fingers tracing the lapel of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He brought himself back to the moment, forcing the image of Victoria from his mind. "Just closing a chapter," he said, his voice smooth as silk. He looked down at Selina, at the fierce ambition burning in her eyes, a mirror of his own, and starting a new one. He leaned in and kissed her, a deliberate public act of branding. The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment for posterity. Alexander Price, the self-made king, sealing his new alliance. The applause from the surrounding crowd was a wave of validation, washing away the last vestiges of his past. He had built this world, and he would burn it down and rebuild it as he saw fit. He was the master of his universe, and tonight he was untouchable. The silence in the penthouse was a living thing. It filled the vast, empty spaces between the minimalist furniture and the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering Manhattan skyline like a cold, indifferent work of art. This was the home Victoria had designed, a sanctuary of clean lines and muted colors meant to be a refuge from the city's chaos. Now it felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a life that was already over. She stood before the window, her reflection a pale, ethereal figure against the backdrop of 1,000 distant lights. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her abdomen, a protective, instinctive gesture. 5 months. 5 months she had carried their child, a secret she had been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal. A quiet dinner, a weekend away, a moment of shared joy that felt increasingly like a fantasy. A faint vibration from the marble-topped island drew her attention. Alexander's iPad, left behind in his haste to attend the gala. It lit up with a notification, a news alert from the Financial Times. Her finger hovered over the screen before she unlocked it with a muscle memory that felt like a betrayal of herself. The screen filled with an image from the gala. Alexander, looking impossibly handsome and powerful, his arm wrapped around a woman in a striking crimson dress. The headline read, "Alexander Price and marketing executive Selina Hart make a stunning debut at the Met Gala for a cause." Debut. The word was a punch to the gut, swift and brutal. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a sordid, fleeting affair. It was a debut, a public declaration. Her mind reeled back 10 years, to another city, another life. Their first office had been a corner of their tiny walk-up apartment in Palo Alto. The air, thick with the smell of instant ramen and ambition, had crackled with energy. He had the vision, the raw, untamed charisma. She had the strategy, the quiet, methodical brilliance that turned his chaotic ideas into viable business models. She remembered the night before his first major pitch to investors. He had been a nervous wreck, pacing the worn linoleum floor, convinced he would fail. She had stayed up with him until 3 a.m., rewriting his presentation, coaching him on his delivery, her calm belief in him a shield against his own self-doubt. "You're not selling them a product, Alex," she had told him, her hand on his. "You're selling them a future. Our future." He had gotten the funding, and as his company, Price Industries, grew from a fledgling startup into a global behemoth, she had remained his shadow partner. It was her analysis that identified the market gap that led to their first billion-dollar acquisition. It was her legal acumen, honed from years of poring over contracts, that saved them from a catastrophic lawsuit. She had been the architect, working silently in the background, content to let him be the face of their shared success. She had believed in their partnership, in the sacred, unspoken pact they had made. A sudden, sharp kick from within brought her back to the present. The baby. Their baby. A wave of nausea, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. This child, conceived in what she had believed was a moment of renewed intimacy after a difficult year, was now a symbol of her profound, catastrophic naivety. She sank onto one of the cold leather bar stools, her body trembling. The woman in the photo, Selina Hart, was young, vibrant, a perfect accessory for the man Alexander had become. Victoria looked at her own reflection again. She saw the faint shadows of fatigue under her eyes, the gentle softening of her features. She was 32, a woman on the cusp of motherhood, a woman who had invested her entire adult life in a man who was now publicly discarding her like a corporate asset that had ceased to perform. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was a strategic dismantling of her life's work. Every sacrifice, every late night, every choice she had made to support him now felt like a foolish, reckless gamble. She had helped him build an empire, and in return, he had rendered her obsolete. Her grief, a tidal wave of pain, threatened to drown her. But beneath the surface of the hurt, something else was stirring. It was a cold, hard ember of the woman she had been before him, the sharp, analytical strategist who saw the world not as a place of emotion, but as a chessboard. He had made his move, a bold, public play designed to intimidate and overwhelm her. He expected her to crumble, to retreat, to accept a quiet, generous settlement and disappear. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten that she knew where all the bodies were buried. Because she had been the one who helped him bury them. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to her home office, a sleek, glass-enclosed space that overlooked the city. She sat down at her desk, the cool surface of the mahogany a grounding force. Her hands, no longer trembling, moved with purpose across the keyboard. She wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a mother-to-be. She was a strategist. And the man she had created, she could also destroy. The game had been set. And Victoria Price, for the first time in a decade, was playing for herself. The illusion was shattered. The reckoning was about to begin. The days that followed the gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Alexander operated with the detached precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. He did not call. He did not come home. Instead, he communicated through his assistant, a brisk, efficient woman who spoke in the clipped, impersonal tones of a corporate press release. Mr. Price has arranged for your personal belongings to be moved to a secure, climate-controlled storage facility of your choosing, the email read. He has also instructed his financial advisor to deposit a sum of 7 figures into your personal account to cover any immediate expenses. It was a severance package, a golden parachute from a 10-year marriage. Victoria read the words on her screen, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. He thought he could buy her silence, her compliance. He was treating their divorce like a hostile takeover, assuming she was a shareholder to be bought out, not the co-founder of the entire enterprise. From his perspective, it was a clean, logical transaction. He was in St. Bart's with Selina, a trip he hadn't even bothered to conceal. Victoria had seen the charge on their joint Amex account, a private villa at Eden Rock, 2 first-class tickets on a private jet, a reservation for 2 at a Michelin-starred restaurant. He was building his new life on the ashes of their old one, and he expected her to simply sweep away the debris. He saw Victoria as an emotional, irrational creature, soon to be further incapacitated by pregnancy and heartbreak. He anticipated tears, recriminations, a messy, drawn-out battle that he could easily win with his army of lawyers and his bottomless fortune. He had underestimated her, a fatal error he would not realize until it was too late. While Alexander was sunning himself in the Caribbean, Victoria was in her own war room. The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, had become her strategic command center. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury that sharpened her mind and focused her will. She started where she always did, with the data. For a decade, she had been the keeper of Alexander's secrets, the one who knew the intricate, often shadowy web of his financial dealings. He had grown arrogant, careless, believing himself to be invincible. He had forgotten that she still had the keys to the kingdom. Her first move was to hire a lawyer, not one of the slick, high-profile divorce attorneys who advertised in glossy magazines, but a legend, a ghost in the legal world. Edmund Hale was a man in his late 60s, a brilliant, semi-retired strategist, known for his discretion and his ruthless, surgical approach to corporate litigation. He rarely took on new clients, but a mutual acquaintance, a man whose career Victoria had once saved with a piece of off-the-record advice, made the introduction. They met in a dusty, book-lined office in a pre-war building downtown, a world away from the gleaming steel and glass of Alexander's empire. Hale, with his piercing blue eyes and his shock of white hair, listened without interruption as Victoria laid out the situation, her voice calm and measured. "He thinks this is a divorce," she said, her hands folded neatly on the desk. "He's wrong. This is a corporate dissolution, and I am a founding partner seeking my equity." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Hale's face. "He has no idea what's coming, does he?" "He's forgotten who I am," Victoria replied. "I'm here to remind him." With Hale's guidance, she began to dig. She started with the shared servers, the cloud accounts, the digital breadcrumbs of their life together. Alexander, in his arrogance, had not bothered to change the passwords. He had not imagined she would have the inclination or the nerve to look. She worked methodically, fueled by black coffee and a righteous anger that burned away her fatigue. She unearthed a network of shell companies, registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama, that Alexander had been using to siphon money from Price Industries. Millions of dollars, disguised as consulting fees and marketing expenses, had been funneled into these offshore accounts. And then she found the link. The beneficiary of one of the largest shell companies, a corporation named Hart Holdings, was Selina Hart. He wasn't just sleeping with her, he was financing her. He had used corporate funds to buy her a multi-million-dollar apartment, to lease her a Maserati, to fund a lavish lifestyle that was now being flaunted in the pages of tabloids. He was stealing from his own company, from his shareholders, to underwrite his affair. The final piece of the puzzle, the digital dagger to the heart, came late one night. Victoria was cross-referencing wire transfers with travel itineraries when she found it. A receipt from a high-end jeweler in Geneva, dated 3 months prior. It was for a custom-designed diamond necklace, a breathtakingly expensive piece called Le Nouveau Départ, the new beginning. The delivery address was Selina Hart's apartment. The payment had been made from an account belonging to Price Industries, funneled through 2 shell corporations before landing with the jeweler. Victoria stared at the receipt on her screen, the elegant script a mockery of everything she had believed in. Le Nouveau Départ. He had been planning his new beginning on her watch, using their money, the fruits of their shared labor, to buy a gift for his mistress. The pain was a physical blow, a white-hot agony that seared through her. But as she looked at the evidence, the wire transfers, the fake invoices, the damning receipt, the pain was forged into something harder, something sharper. It was the weapon she needed. She downloaded everything, creating multiple encrypted backups. The files were a ticking time bomb, a meticulously documented account of Alexander's fraud, theft, and betrayal. He had started a war, confident in his power, his wealth, and his control. But he had made a critical mistake. He had left the most dangerous weapon in the hands of his enemy. He had left her with the truth, and Victoria was about to use it to burn his world to the ground. The invitation arrived via a sleek, black-liveried courier. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the embossed gold lettering announcing the annual Price Industries Foundation charity ball. It was the social event of the season, a night where the city's elite gathered to celebrate philanthropy while engaging in the more serious business of power brokering. It was Alexander's crown jewel, the ultimate symbol of his public largesse and corporate dominance. Victoria held the invitation in her hand, the sharp corners digging into her palm. Her name was printed next to his, a relic of a life that no longer existed. Mr. Alexander and Mrs. Victoria Price request the pleasure of your company. His office had clearly forgotten to update the mailing list. Or more likely, they hadn't dared to remove her without his direct command. A command he had been too busy in St. Bart's to give. A slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. It was perfect. A stage already set. An audience already assembled. In the weeks since her discovery, Victoria had moved with the silent, deadly efficiency of a predator. Her days were a blur of encrypted calls with Edmund Hale, clandestine meetings with a forensic accounting team he had hired, and long nights spent piecing together the labyrinth of Alexander's deceit. Her grief had been transmuted into fuel. The pregnancy, once a source of vulnerability, was now her armor. Every kick from her unborn son was a reminder of what she was fighting for. Not just for herself, but for the child who deserved to be born into a world free of his father's lies. The evidence is ironclad, Hale had told her in their last meeting, his voice grimly satisfied. He had spread the documents across his mahogany desk, the wire transfers, the falsified invoices, the deeds to properties bought in Selina's name with corporate funds. This isn't just grounds for divorce. This is mail fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. We have enough to interest not only the SEC, but the district attorney's office. Victoria had looked at the mountain of evidence, the paper trail of her husband's betrayal. I don't just want to divorce him, Edmund, she had said, her voice low and steady. I want to dismantle him. Hale had given her a long, appraising look. The gala is in 2 weeks, he had said, a glint in his eye. A public forum. It would be theatrical. He loves the theatre, Victoria had replied. Let's give him a night to remember. Meanwhile, Alexander had returned from the Caribbean, tanned, rested, and radiating an aura of untouchable power. He had moved into a suite at the Four Seasons, holding court in the hotel's power broker bar, seemingly oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. He had finally filed for divorce, his lawyers sending over a proposed settlement that was both insultingly generous and deeply condescending. It offered her the penthouse, a lifetime stipend, and a gag order that would prevent her from ever speaking about their marriage or his business dealings. He thought he was closing a deal. He had no idea she was preparing for a war. The day of the gala, Victoria woke with a sense of calm resolve. She spent the morning on a conference call with Hale and a team of public relations experts, finalizing the strategy. The plan was audacious, a multi-pronged attack designed to strike at the very foundations of Alexander's power. Hale had prepared 2 packages. The first, a comprehensive report detailing Alexander's financial crimes, had been sent via secure messenger to Charles Whitmore, the most influential and morally rigid member of the Price Industries board. Whitmore was old money, a man who valued integrity and reputation above all else. He was the key to turning the board against Alexander. The package was timed to arrive exactly 1 hour before the gala began. The second package contained the official divorce filing, citing adultery and financial malfeasance, along with subpoenas for Alexander and Selina. Hale himself would serve them. In the middle of the ballroom, As evening approached, Victoria began her own preparations. She had commissioned a dress, a custom creation from a designer known for his dramatic, avant-garde pieces. When it arrived, she unwrapped it from its silk cocoon. It was a gown of deep, blood-red velvet, a stark, shocking color that would command attention. It was a warrior's color. She styled her hair in a sleek, severe chignon, her makeup understated but flawless. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the soft, accommodating wife Alexander had left behind. This was a woman forged in the fires of betrayal, her eyes holding a glint of steel. She was 5.5 months pregnant, her belly a gentle, undeniable curve beneath the crimson velvet. She was not hiding it. It was part of her statement. She was a mother, a creator, a woman on the brink of a new life, and she would not be erased. As she slipped on a pair of diamond earrings, a gift from a long-ago anniversary, a relic of a time when his love had felt real, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Hale. "Whitmore has the package. The curtain is about to go up." Victoria took a deep breath, her hand resting on her child. "It's time, little one," she whispered. Time for the show to begin. She walked out of the penthouse, leaving the ghost of her old life behind. She was not just attending a party. She was walking onto a battlefield, and she was ready for the reckoning. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the low thrum of a string quartet and the high-pitched chatter of the city's most powerful people. At the center of it all, holding court near the grand staircase, was Alexander Price. He was in his element, a magnetic force field of charm and power. Selina was at his side, draped in a glittering silver dress, her hand possessively on his arm. They were the undisputed king and queen of the evening, a portrait of modern success. Alexander felt a deep, satisfying sense of rightness. He had weathered the initial storm of his separation with barely a ripple. The settlement papers were filed. Victoria had gone quiet, just as he'd predicted. He had won. He was in the middle of a story, his audience of bankers and socialites hanging on his every word, when a sudden hush fell over the room. It started near the entrance, a wave of silence that spread through the crowd like a contagion. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Alexander followed their gaze. And then he saw her. Victoria was standing at the top of the grand staircase. The crowd parted before her, as if by an invisible force. She was a vision in crimson, the deep, rich velvet of her gown, a stark, dramatic contrast to the pale, glittering pastels favored by the other women. The dress was a masterpiece of tailoring, clinging to her torso before flowing to the floor, its severe, elegant lines accentuating the undeniable curve of her pregnancy. Her face was serene, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, fixed on him, burned with an intensity that sent a jolt of pure, cold shock through his system. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be at home, broken and defeated. He felt Selina stiffen beside him. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Alexander couldn't answer. He was frozen, transfixed by the impossible sight of his wife, descending the staircase with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen approaching her throne. She was not alone. At her side was a tall, imposing man with a shock of white hair and the predatory stillness of a hawk. Edmund Hale, a cold dread, an emotion Alexander hadn't felt in years, began to creep up his spine. This was not a social call. This was an ambush. Victoria and Hale reached the bottom of the stairs and moved toward him, their progress tracked by 100 pairs of eyes. The string quartet faltered, the music dying away into an unnerving silence. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic click of Victoria's heels on the marble floor. They stopped directly in front of him. Victoria's gaze was unwavering, her calm more terrifying than any scream. "Alexander," she said, her voice clear and cool, carrying easily through the silent room. "You look well." Before he could form a response, Edmund Hale stepped forward. He was holding a leather folio. "Alexander Price," he said, his voice resonating with legal authority. "You are hereby served." He opened the folio and handed a sheaf of documents to a stunned Alexander. "This is a petition for divorce, citing adultery and the fraudulent dissipation of marital assets." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Hale then turned to a pale, wide-eyed Selina. "Selina Hart, you are hereby served with a subpoena. You will be required to give a deposition regarding your financial relationship with Mr. Price and your role as a director of several offshore corporations." Selina snatched the papers from his hand as if they were on fire, her face a mask of disbelief and panic. But Hale wasn't finished. He turned back to Alexander, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet clearly audible tone. "I believe you also have a call to get to, Alex. Charles Whitmore and the rest of the board are waiting for you in the library. They have some questions for you. Something about a report I sent them. It details a rather creative use of corporate funds." Alexander's blood ran cold. Whitmore. The report. He looked from Hale's grimly triumphant face to Victoria's serene, implacable expression. He saw it all in a flash. The shell companies, the wire transfers, the jewelry. She knew. She knew everything. He looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues, his investors, his rivals. He saw shock, confusion, and in the eyes of his enemies, a dawning, predatory glee. His carefully constructed world, his empire of smoke and mirrors, was imploding in real time. "Victoria," he managed, his voice a strangled whisper. "Don't do this." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not anger, but a profound, bottomless pity. "You did this to yourself, Alex," she said softly. She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture of finality. "This is my new beginning." She turned, her crimson gown swirling around her, and walked away, Edmund Hale at her side. She did not look back. The crowd parted for her once more, a silent, stunned audience, watching the final act of a tragedy they had not seen coming. Alexander stood frozen, the papers in his hand feeling as heavy as a tombstone. The flash of a camera phone went off, then another, and another. The vultures were descending. His reign was over, and his wife, the woman he had discarded and underestimated, had just become his executioner. The library of the plaza was a somber, wood-paneled room that smelled of old leather and new money. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom. The board of Price Industries was assembled around the long, polished table, their faces grim, their silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. At the head of the table sat Charles Whitmore, his patrician features set in a mask of cold fury. In his hands, he held the report. Hale's report. Victoria's report. Alexander walked into the room, the whispers and stares of the gala guests following him like a shroud. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him in with his judges. "Alexander," Whitmore began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We have read this document. It makes some very serious allegations." "Charles, this is a private matter," Alexander started, trying to project an aura of calm, of control. "A bitter divorce. My wife is emotional." Whitmore's eyes flashed with contempt. "Emotional? This report contains account numbers, wire transfer confirmations, and incorporation documents for shell companies. It details the embezzlement of over $50 million of corporate funds. This is not emotion, Alexander. This is evidence. He slid a copy of the report across the table. Alexander's eyes scanned the first page, a summary of his crimes laid out in cold, black and white print. He saw the name Hart Holdings, the transfers to the Geneva jeweler, the purchase of Selina's apartment. It was all there. Meticulous, undeniable. The work of a master strategist. The work of Victoria. The report alleges that you used shareholder money to finance your relationship with Miss Hart, another board member, a stern woman named Eleanor Vance, said, her voice dripping with disdain. Is this true? Alexander's mind raced, searching for a way out, an angle, a lie. But there was none. He was cornered, trapped in a cage of his own making. There are complexities, he began, his voice faltering. The only complexity I see, Whitmore cut in, his voice like ice, is that you have exposed this company to catastrophic legal and financial risk. You have betrayed our trust. You have betrayed your fiduciary duty. The SEC will be launching a formal investigation by morning. The DA's office will not be far behind. Alexander looked at the faces around the table. He saw no allies. He saw only men and women who had once revered him, now looking at him as if he were a disease. He had built this company from nothing, dragged it to the top of the world with his bare hands, and now they were taking it from him. In light of these revelations, Whitmore continued, his voice heavy with finality, the board has held an emergency vote. We have voted unanimously to demand your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of Price Industries. If you refuse, we will have you removed, publicly. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Resignation. It was a death sentence. His company, his identity, his life's work. Gone. You can't, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. We can and we have, Whitmore said, standing up, a clear signal that the meeting was over. The king is dead, Alex. You would do well to remember that. The board members filed out of the room, none of them meeting his eye. Alexander was left alone in the silent library, the report lying on the table like an epitaph. He stumbled out of the hotel through a side entrance, avoiding the glare of the cameras and the baying of the press. He got into his car, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. He drove aimlessly through the city streets, the glittering lights of his kingdom now seeming to mock him. His phone buzzed incessantly. His lawyer, his PR team, his assistant. He ignored them all. There was only one person he wanted to talk to, one person who could explain the sheer, cataclysmic totality of his ruin. He drove to the penthouse, using his old key, half expecting it not to work. But it did. The apartment was dark and silent. He called her name. Victoria. No answer. He walked through the rooms, a ghost in his own home. Everything was as he remembered it. Yet everything was different. It was no longer his. He found her in the living room. She was collapsed on the sofa, her crimson gown pooled around her like a pool of blood. One hand was clutching her belly, her face pale and contorted in pain. The empty glass from which she had been drinking water had fallen from her other hand and lay shattered on the floor. Victoria! He rushed to her side, his own ruin forgotten in a surge of pure, primal fear. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her, afraid to touch her. Victoria, what's wrong? She opened her eyes, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The baby, she whispered, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. Something's wrong. He saw a smear of blood on the light-colored sofa beneath her. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He scooped her up into his arms, her body surprisingly light. He ran from the apartment, a desperate, broken man, his entire world reduced to this single, terrifying moment. The empire was gone. The money was gone. All that was left was the woman he had destroyed and the child he was about to lose. The hospital corridor was a sterile, white purgatory. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. Alexander sat on a hard plastic chair, his tuxedo wrinkled, his face pale with exhaustion. The adrenaline of the past few hours had worn off, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. He had been here for hours, watching the rhythmic dance of nurses and doctors, their faces grim and professional. They spoke to him in hushed, clinical tones, using words he didn't understand. Placental abruption, fetal distress, emergency procedure. He had signed forms, answered questions, his hand shaking so badly he could barely write his own name. He was no longer Alexander Price, the titan of industry. In this white, sterile world, he was just a man, stripped of his power, his wealth, his identity. He was the husband in the waiting room, a helpless bystander to a drama in which he had no role to play. His phone had not stopped buzzing. He had finally switched it off, unable to bear the constant stream of notifications, each one a fresh report on his public execution. Price Industries CEO resigns amid scandal. SEC launches formal probe. Alexander Price's empire crumbles. It all seemed so distant, so irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was behind the closed doors of the operating room. He thought of Victoria, her face pale with pain, her hand clutching her belly. He thought of the child, their child, a tiny, fragile life caught in the crossfire of a war he had started. A profound, crushing weight of guilt settled over him, a feeling so foreign and so powerful it threatened to suffocate him. He had been so arrogant, so certain of his own invincibility. He had seen his wife, his partner, as an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved. He had never once considered the human cost of his actions. He had never considered the possibility that his betrayal could have physical, life-threatening consequences. A doctor appeared, his green scrubs dotted with sweat, his expression weary. Alexander shot to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mr. Price?" the doctor said. Is the baby?" He couldn't finish the sentence. The doctor gave him a tired, reassuring smile. "Your wife is stable. She's a fighter. We had to perform an emergency C-section. It was touch and go for a while, but she's resting now." Relief, so potent it made him dizzy, washed over him. "And the baby? You have a son," the doctor said. "He's premature, and he's in the NICU, but he's breathing on his own. He's a fighter, just like his mother. A son." The words echoed in the sterile silence of the corridor. He had a son. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "She's in recovery," the doctor said. "She's asked to see you." He followed the doctor to a private room. Victoria was lying in the bed, looking small and fragile against the crisp white sheets. An IV was attached to her arm, and her face was pale, but her eyes were open, and they were clear. He stood by the door, uncertain, an intruder in this sanctuary of pain and survival. "They told me it's a boy," she said, her voice weak but steady. He nodded, unable to speak. "I've named him Nicholas," she said, "after my father, Nicholas. A good, strong name. A name that had nothing to do with him." "Victoria, he started. The words, "I'm sorry," feeling so inadequate, so pathetic, they died on his lips. She looked at him, her gaze holding not the anger he expected, not the triumph he deserved, but a deep, weary sadness. "You know, Alex," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted you to see me." And in that moment, he did. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the brilliant, passionate partner who had believed in him when no one else did. He saw the decade of shared dreams, the sacrifices she had made, the love she had given to freely. He saw everything he had thrown away in his blind, arrogant pursuit of more. The doctor said the stress, the shock. It caused this, she continued, her eyes never leaving his. They said we were lucky. We almost lost him. The weight of his actions, the full, terrible consequence of his betrayal, crashed down on him. He had almost killed his own son. Tears, hot and shameful, welled in his eyes. He stumbled forward, sinking to his knees by her bedside, his head bowed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words finally breaking free, raw and broken. "Victoria, I am so sorry." She reached out, her hand resting for a moment on his bowed head. It was not a gesture of forgiveness, but of farewell. "Go, Alex," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Go and deal with the world you created. My world is here now." He looked up, and he saw the truth in her eyes. The bond between them, the love that had once been the foundation of his life, was irrevocably broken. He had shattered it, and it could never be repaired. He stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her with their son, with the new life she had fought for. He was alone, a disgraced king in a fallen kingdom, with nothing left but the ashes of the man he used to be. The reckoning was over. The penance was just beginning. The world Alexander stepped back into was a foreign country. The familiar landmarks of his life, the corner office with its panoramic views, the deferential greetings from his staff, the easy access to the corridors of power, had all vanished. He was an exile in his own city. His days were a monotonous cycle of meetings with lawyers, a new team specializing in white-collar criminal defense. They spoke in grim, pragmatic terms about plea bargains, sentencing guidelines, and the likelihood of incarceration. The SEC investigation was in full swing, and the district attorney's office had convened a grand jury. The evidence Victoria had compiled was a legal guillotine hanging over his head. Selina was gone. Subpoenaed and facing her own legal jeopardy, she had hired a lawyer who had promptly advised her to cooperate fully with the authorities. Her testimony, a detailed account of Alexander's financial machinations, was the final nail in his coffin. She had disappeared from public view, her social media accounts deleted, her apartment sold, the crimson dress and the diamond necklace now evidence in a federal investigation. She had been a fleeting, expensive dream that had turned into a waking nightmare. He lived in a rented apartment, a sterile, anonymous space that felt more like a holding cell than a home. He rarely went out. The few times he did, he was met with the curious stares of strangers, the whispers of people who recognized him from the news. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and board meetings. He had lost everything, his company, his reputation, his fortune. His assets were frozen, his accounts under scrutiny. The empire he had built was being dismantled, sold off in pieces to his rivals. Price Industries, the company that bore his name, would soon cease to exist. But the greatest loss, the one that haunted his waking hours and tormented his dreams, was the loss of his family. He had a son he had never held, a son he only saw in the grainy pictures Victoria's lawyer sent as a professional courtesy. Nicholas Price, a tiny, perfect child, growing stronger each day in the NICU, oblivious to the ruin his father had wrought. He thought of Victoria, of her strength, her resilience, her quiet, unshakable dignity. He had tried to break her, and instead, she had been reborn. He followed the news of her new life with a kind of masochistic obsession. She had used a portion of her settlement, a settlement she had dictated the terms of, a fraction of what she was truly owed, but enough to secure her independence, to launch a foundation, the Victoria Collins Foundation, dedicated to supporting female entrepreneurs and promoting ethical business practices. She had reclaimed her maiden name, shedding the last vestiges of her life with him. She was no longer Mrs. Alexander Price. She was Victoria Collins, a name that was quickly becoming synonymous with integrity and empowerment. She was a symbol of survival, a phoenix risen from the ashes of his betrayal. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating silence of his apartment, he found himself driving, his car moving on autopilot until he was parked across the street from the hospital. He watched the lights in the windows, imagining Victoria in one of those rooms, holding their son, her world complete, her life moving forward. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of a life he had forfeited. He had had it all, a brilliant, loving partner, a child on the way, an empire at his feet, and he had traded it all for a cheap, glittering illusion. The truth, in the end, was simple and brutal. He had not been destroyed by Victoria, or the board, or the SEC. He had been destroyed by his own hubris, by the gaping, insatiable void in his own soul that he had tried to fill with money and power and the adoration of a world he no longer belonged to. He started the car and drove away, the hospital shrinking in his rearview mirror. There was no going back. There was no forgiveness. There was only the long, empty road ahead, and the ghost of the man he might have been. The first gala for the Victoria Collins Foundation was held not in a grand, old-world ballroom, but in a modern, light-filled art gallery in Chelsea. The space was vibrant and alive, filled with the buzz of new ideas and the energy of a new generation of leaders. There were no aging titans of industry, no jaded socialites. The guests were young, hungry entrepreneurs, artists, activists and thinkers. The very people Victoria's foundation was created to support. Victoria stood near the entrance, greeting her guests with a warm, genuine smile. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, her only jewelry a delicate silver locket. She was not the woman in the crimson gown, the avenging angel of a public reckoning. She was a woman at peace, a woman who had found her purpose. Her son Nicholas, now a healthy, thriving 6-month-old, was at home with his nanny. He was the center of her universe, a source of joy so profound it eclipsed the shadows of her past. She was a mother, a CEO, a philanthropist. She was the architect of her own life, and she was building it on a foundation of integrity and strength. Edmund Hale was there, a proud, paternal figure at her side. Charles Whitmore had also come, his presence a quiet endorsement from the old guard. He approached her, his expression one of deep, sincere respect. "Victoria," he said, taking her hand. "What you have built here, it's remarkable, a testament to your character." "Thank you for coming, Charles," she said. "It means a great deal. The world needs more people like you," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "And fewer people like him." She knew who he meant. Alexander was a ghost, a name whispered in the past tense. He had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud, avoiding a lengthy trial in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was serving 3 years in a minimum security federal prison. His name, once a symbol of power, was now a byword for disgrace. Later in the evening, Victoria took the stage to address her guests. A hush fell over the room as she approached the podium. She looked out at the sea of faces, and she saw not an audience, but a community. "I started this foundation," she began, her voice clear and strong, "because I believe in the power of a new beginning. I believe that our greatest strength is not found in our successes, but in how we rise from our failures. It is in the moments when we are broken that we discover who we truly are." She paused, her hand instinctively going to the locket at her neck. Many of you know my story. You have read the headlines. But that story is not about betrayal or revenge or the fall of an empire. It is a story about resilience. It is about the quiet, unwavering strength that lies within each of us, waiting to be discovered. My new beginning, she continued, a soft smile on her lips, is my son. It is this foundation. It is the belief that we can build a world where success is not measured by wealth or power, but by integrity, by compassion, and by the courage to build something better on the ashes of what came before. A wave of applause, warm and heartfelt, filled the room. Victoria stepped down from the stage, her heart full. She had taken the pain, the betrayal, the ruin, and she had transformed it into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that would last. As the evening wound down, she stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. It was the same view she had seen from the penthouse, but it looked different now. It was no longer a cold, indifferent landscape. It was a city of possibility, a world of new beginnings. She was free. She was whole. She was home. The past was a closed chapter, a story that had been told. Her future was an open book, and she was the only one holding the pen. And for the first time in a very long time, she couldn't wait to write the next page.